I grew up in a Christian home, but left home and very quickly actually turned pretty atheist, angry atheist. As soon as I figured out that there was porn available, I started looking at porn online, and that became a pretty intense habit. Basically moved my pornography addiction into a sex addiction, but managed to rationalize that sex addiction as like, oh, I'm just having all these spiritual experiences. Sat down and prayed like, Jesus, God, if you're there, then show yourself to me. Make me convinced that you actually exist. And when I said that prayer, it was like I finished the prayer and it was like waking up from a drunken daze almost. I felt like I was kind of like suddenly I had been asleep.
Paul, welcome to the podcast, man.
It's an honor to be here. Thanks.
Okay, you are a former political scientist, liberal, progressive that has converted to Christianity, Eastern Orthodoxy. You've started a brand called Manifesto, Redefining Masculinity. You do a bunch of incredible things. We're going to get into all of it, but you got a story up, man. I got to hear about this. How did you have this conversion? What happened?
Yeah, well, it's almost a question, where does one start, right? I grew up in a Christian home, but left home and very quickly actually turned pretty atheist, angry atheist, and was most of my life, my adult life, in my 20s and early 30s, just kind of angry with Christianity.
How come?
That's a long question, but I think the main reason was a rebellion, wanting to do things my own way. Had grown up with pretty strict moral guidelines and wanted to break out of that. And so I think, at the heart of a lot of my problems in life has been my relationship with women. And I just couldn't accept the wisdom that was given to me in my childhood. I wanted to do things the way I thought it should be. And so I was desperately looking, this is with hindsight, I can say I was looking for my own way of doing stuff. And so the easiest way was to demonize Christianity and Christ to be able to do that. So I was around like 10 people like Christianity and religion is the source of all evil and wars and all that kind of stuff. And, ridiculing and shaming people for their faith for very many years. Yeah.
Okay, so it was kind of this rebellion thing. You're angry at Christianity. I think a lot of people who grow up in maybe more rigid Christianity without, healthy relationship and explanations and all that kind of stuff can really fall into this. So I'm sure a lot of people listening get it. Even I get it. And then how long were you in liberalism and a political scientist and all that? How long did that last?
Well, so I studied political science at Copenhagen University. It's one of the most liberal universities of the world. It's incredible. Like Karl Marx was the main theorist that we studied, and kind of fully emerged into that way of thinking. Worked at Microsoft for 8 years with environmental sustainability. So it was like leading a global team, traveling around the world, and talking with all the right people and living that life. And increasingly noticing that my life felt empty, and the things I was talking about weren't having, like, it was really just about earning money and climbing the corporate ladder. And so there was an emptiness inside, and my relationship with my then partner also fell to pieces. We had a child, and our relationship ended. So I realized there needed to be more to life than this. Something was missing, something was lacking, and that set me off on a spiritual search, which in the beginning was everything but Christianity.
Right.
Everything but. So I was living in India and Thailand for.
Oh wow! Okay.
Yeah.
You did it all
kinds of different stuff. And eventually, after several years of that, I'd say 2016, 2017, had an experience on a mountaintop in South Africa where I'd been really battling with this idea of faith. I was like, I can't really have faith in God. I've had a scientific understanding of the world. I'd studied university. I can't just, faith is like, silly superstition. I can't do that. And then someone said to me, I said to him, how do I get faith if I want faith? And he said, you just ask for it. And I was like, something just clicked in me when he said that. He was like, oh yeah, like if I actually sat down and exercised that tiny muscle of faith that I did have, and, it was quite sheepishly sat down and prayed like, Jesus, God, if you're there, then show yourself to me.
Yeah.
Make me convinced that you actually exist. And when I said that prayer, it was like I finished the prayer and it was like waking up from a drunken daze almost. I felt like I was kind of like suddenly I had been asleep and I'd been in a zombie kind of like state. And suddenly I realized like, God is everywhere in all things. And it's scary and amazing. And there was spirits in all things as well. Right. And so I was suddenly being awake and aware of that world.
Wow. Okay, 2016, 17. Okay, lots of questions about that, but let me just circle back real quick because you made a quick passing comment about your relationship with women, which it sounds like was part of your wrestle, some of the things you've had to work through. And then you mentioned being with somebody, having a child together, and you're no longer with that person. I'm just wondering if you can connect some dots there for me as well. What's the story?
Yeah, so I grew up in a good family. My parents are very loving and caring for each other. Married today for more than 40 years, and still sit and hold each other's hands and are really kind to each other. But so unfortunately, I have to take the full blame on myself in that I think the root, maybe a root problem is I was one of the first kids in my, I'm born in 81. I was one of the first kids in my school to get internet access. And what did I do? Well, as soon as I figured out that there was porn available, I started looking at porn online. And that became a pretty intense habit that continued all the way up into the relationship with the mother of my first child, where I was secretly, shamefully had this habit of looking at porn. And if I have to look at what that did to me, I think it really made me objectify, women as a means to getting gratification for my sexual desires, lusts, impulses, and kind of making a transactional type of relationship with women that I was constantly trying to show loving, caring behavior, but with an expectation of something. And obviously, and sex was very central to that. And when I didn't get it, I got upset and depressed for various reasons or something like that.
When you were in more progressive circles, did you have any conviction about pornography, or what was your stance on pornography in that stage of your life?
For a long time, I never really reflected on it. It was a hidden thing that I kept in the dark and did when other people weren't around. So I think I instinctively knew that that there was something that was shameful about it. But especially at that time, it wasn't something I consciously had an idea about. So, but definitely, I think if someone asked me, or if it was in polite conversation, then I would have. And someone had, especially if there was like a female present who said like, "Oh yeah, pornography is really bad." My then partner would often tell how about terrible pornography was, then I would certainly agree with her very strongly about how terrible it was, but I would try and avoid the subject as well, because obviously there was guilt and shame under the surface there.
When did that relationship end with your partner?
It's probably 14 years ago. I'm 43 today. So.
Okay. So this is prior to your conversion to Christianity.
Yeah. Prior to me even deciding to like kind of that I needed some alternative to the secular worldview.
And how much does some of these dynamics like porn usage and that kind of stuff factor in? I mean, especially in hindsight, it sounds like maybe at the time it wasn't really, you weren't aware of it, but what do you think when you look back?
Well, at the time then, I wasn't aware at all of that being the issue. Certainly not. And it is I remember though, so one thing that happened towards the end of our relationship is that we went on a road trip to the United States. And I was reading a book called On the Road by Jack Kerouac. You might have heard of it. It was the Beat Generation, where these guys, and I don't know what exactly the date of it, but it's like these guys who just decided like to fully live life and do what they really wanted to do instead of living in the kind of cage. And it really struck a chord in me very deeply. And I actually went to San Francisco on this trip and met one of my friends there who was very involved in the Burning Man community, and just saw how he was really, living with this radical self-expression and all this kind of stuff there. And so as we're driving out of San Francisco, heading up north with my wife in the car and our then 1-year-old child, or less than one, probably 9-month-old child, I said to her, like, hey, sometimes I watch porn on the computer. And this was the first time I said it to her. She was really hurt and offended, and we weren't able to talk about it. The conversation didn't go anywhere.
Yeah.
So that was probably like, a year and a half later, we broke up.
So year and a half later, you break up. A couple years later, you have this conversion, and I want to hear a little bit more about. It sounds to me like, if I hear it correctly, you basically say, like, God, give me faith. Like, if you're really real, show me you're real, and give me faith to actually believe it.
Yeah.
And while you're there, you're feeling this shift, or does this happen progressively over time, or some days, or how do you go from being where you were before, not really knowing what to believe, to now you've seen the light?
I mean, I'll definitely say, like, it's not something I recommend. Like Christ says, like, don't tempt God, right? You don't want to. It's an unreasonable demand, and today I would never make a demand like that. But it's also something. So in the Orthodox Church, we just celebrated Thomas Sunday. This was this past Sunday. In the West, we call him Doubting Thomas. But actually,
Right.
when I first came into the Orthodox Church, then there's an icon of the Apostle Thomas touching the side of Christ, where, in the side, in the wound. Obviously, when he said, like, I don't really believe, like, until I've touched, until I've seen it myself with my own eyes. And this icon actually isn't called Doubting Thomas. It's called the Assurance of Thomas. And this was something that I really had confirmed for me in some ways. Like, when, as an innocent and naive child with, no faith, asking, like, from a good heart, give me faith, then it was really like that. It was really instantaneous. Like, I went from, in the beginning, I didn't know what to do with this insight.
Sure.
And what I went around and told people, I was really worried about being this kind of person, like telling people that I was become a Christian. They would think I'm weird and strange or something like that, especially living in Denmark. It's very secular here, right? To believe in God is kind of weird. So I tell people, no, I'm acting as if God exists. But I really had the sense, like, it is as if God exists.
Yeah, it's not actually a show, but yeah.
So that was what, and then it just grew. So the conviction and the courage to actually admit it to myself and to other people grew in time. But the sense of, like, that, like, that God exists and that there's spiritual warfare, like, in my heart and everywhere around me in my society, was very, very instantaneous. Like, when I just opened the door to that belief. And I'd say what had led me to that prayer as well was actually another person. I know we just spoke about Toronto when we started here. So another well-known Toronto person, Jordan Peterson, who I'd begun following him, and I don't follow him that much today, but back then he kind of built a bridge for me. And one of the core things he said, he was talking about the Bible. And he said, this book and the stories in it are far older than any civilization that's ever existed. And so at the very least, you have to take it seriously and grapple with it. You can't just write it off as silly fairy tales and superstition. You have to at least grapple with it. And so I had sat down with the Bible and read up about sexuality and men and women relationships. And as I did that, it just became clear, like, oh, this is where all my problems are coming from. This is because, like, there's just this structure of being, the structure of relationship between men and women, and I've ignored it and tried to figure out things myself. And that's why all this pain and suffering had been happening in my life. I'd been trying with really good intentions to create a lifelong, strong, stable relationship with a woman the best way that I could. And I couldn't understand why it wasn't working. I didn't understand. And then suddenly it all made sense.
So let's unpack that. What were some of the things that you saw in Scripture, especially from a structural perspective, that you started to apply in your life?
First of all, that the meeting between a man and a woman is an icon of Christ, the icon of divinity, an icon of the Holy Trinity. And so this idea of marriage is very, very central to the biblical story. The Bible starts with the marriage of Adam and Eve. Christ starts his ministry at a marriage, actually, at the wedding of Cana.
That's right.
And the very final story of the biblical account, it's a wedding feast in heaven. And so the primary metaphor that's used actually for the description of God meeting man is that of a bride and a bridegroom. And it comes everywhere throughout the Bible. And so it's a very deep and mysterious thing to understand. But it's built on, it's built on love. It happens through love. And that's a specific, that love has a specific form and comes through a specific expression. And the most beautiful form of it, especially for a man, is to look at how Christ loved the church and gave his life for it. That's the way we're supposed to meet a woman.
Yes.
And so you don't do that. I've been involved in polyamory communities and, kind of all kinds of other very explorative sexual communities as well. And it just became so clear how this is an absolute degrading of this beautiful gift that has been given to us to be able to. I really see it. It's the pathway to salvation for a man goes through his marriage. It's through. That's where you learn to love. Loving someone far away from you, loving other people in Africa and giving them some money. That's easy. The hard thing is loving your wife, loving your children. This is the difficult thing. And so that's the core place where we're really meeting up on the battlefield and having to deal with our own weaknesses and our own impurities, and learning humility and repentance, really.
Yeah. So I have to imagine when you ask God to give you faith, you kind of have this instantaneous mind clearing. I've woken up from this fog and okay, God is real. And now I'm seeing everything through a different lens. Was there a part of you that was scared or kind of freaked out? And I'm also just imagining if I sort of had this early life experiences with Christianity, and I believe you said your parents were Pentecostal, so Pentecostal church, I'm just thinking back in the 80s. I can only just imagine some of the teachings you would have heard and some of the dynamics in the church. Did you fear like, wait a minute, if God is real, do I have to go back to that? Or did you have any of that? Or did you kind of know that you were maybe going to pursue it differently this time?
Well, the primary feeling I had when this happened was, I don't have to figure all out myself. That was like, it was relief. It was like this massive burden of me having to try and understand everything myself and get it all to work. Yeah. And I could just surrender to something. That was the primary feeling. Yeah. And the feeling was a surrendering to a personal relationship with God. And I think I knew quite clearly, it probably wouldn't be exactly the same faith that my parents had, because my parents were living in a different country to me. And they have a church that's just down there. So I knew it would be something different. But I didn't know what it all would look like. And I certainly wouldn't have thought at that time it was going to be the Orthodox church. I'd never really heard of the Orthodox church at that time. So no, I think it was mainly excitement. There was a fear, but it was a fear of God. It was a realization that I'd been living contrary to God for many, many years, and treating the temple of my body as a whorehouse, basically, and mistreating everything about myself, really squandering the talents. So that there was that fear for certain. It was a sudden realization, oh, I got to get things sorted out, and I got to get them sorted out really fast. Yeah. I went back to my girlfriend at the time, and I said to her, hey, we need to be celibate. And she was like, no, what do you mean?
Wow. Okay.
And then we had a conversation about that, and then actually after a while she understood it. But
I would love to hear more about that, actually, because that's very relevant for our audiences. And, I have a practice called Deep Clean, helping men quit pornography addiction. So you have this conversation with your girlfriend, hey, we need to be celibate. And then she comes around, and then what happened is that the person that you wound up marrying?
That's the woman I ended up marrying, but only after I broke up with her first.
Okay.
So we moved, this was down in South Africa that this happened. We come back to Denmark, where we're living together in a little apartment, and trying to, she understood, okay, I said to her, this is about the rest of my life. I need to decide, are we going to commit and have children and build a family together for the rest of our lives, or are we not going to do that?
So you've had a total 180. You went from, okay, we're living together, we're doing our thing, you have a kid from a previous relationship, whatever, to now absolutely. It's okay, I want to be celibate. I'm dating to get married. I can only imagine what's going through your wife.
I didn't even think of dating. No, I didn't want to date. I was it's I'm either courting a woman with the express intention of marrying, or we're just friends. The dating, I wouldn't even encounter dating. So for me.
How did you know that though? Is that from your upbringing in Pentecostalism, or were you getting mentored or discipled by somebody at this point?
No. This was. I guess it was from my childhood that
Oh wow,
I
it's
kind of realized
fascinating.
it. But it also just became very clear. Like the purpose of sexuality is to bind a man and a woman together in the union of marriage and to create children.
Yeah.
And it's so obvious, and so it just became so clear, like how I'd been living contrary to that, and it was a misuse of my sexuality to be doing anything else. I mean, like yeah. So it yeah. I
So
had the
then,
example of my parents, of course, as well, right? They've been
yes, which that is actually very powerful. I mean,
yeah.
it's a fair point. But you were in polyamory. You mentioned watching a lot of pornography, and that was just kind of whatever. So what's the story there? Like, does all this stuff kind of come to a grinding halt at the same time?
Oh, yeah, no. So already in the beginning of my spiritual search, I can just be very direct, like after I broke up with my then partner, then I was a single man. Um, and I can't remember exactly when it was. I got it wrong. I said to you 14 years ago, but it was actually 16 years ago that we broke up, or maybe even 17 around there. So it's even a little further back. But then, not so long after that, I had this experience that I I I woke up one morning and I was feeling lustful, and I couldn't arouse myself without pornography.
Hmm.
And that was a shock for me. It was a real shock. Like I was like, oh my gosh, I have to have pornography in order to even stimulate myself, to be able to pleasure myself. And so I realized like something's wrong here. And so then I started looking into like what's this about, and searching online and stuff like that. And that actually led me into this field of tantra, because again I was everything but Christianity still at this stage, right? And so when I went into tantra, then it became quite clear already how like pornography is basically like this incredibly powerful meditation, backed up with masturbation. That's with this very strong hormonal release that's kind of like wiring your entire system to be like addicted to a screen. And it's the ultimate objectification. There's a good argument to be made that even visiting a prostitute, then you're at least dealing with another human being, whereas with a screen, it's so disconnecting from anything human. So, not that I'm encouraging people to go to prostitutes in any way, please understand.
I understand the comparison. Yeah, I get you.
But so I went into this world of tantra and basically moved my pornography addiction into a sex addiction, but managed to rationalize that sex addiction as like, oh, I'm just having all these spiritual experiences.
It's a godly thing.
And so I got over the porn, but then instead started hooking up with multiple women at the same time and using it as some kind of spiritual practice was the idea and thinking in those communities.
And so at what point do you break out of this? I'm going to guess you're not a sex addict anymore based on some of the conversations we've had.
Only that experience on the mountain that lasted all the way up until the experience on the mountain. Like, so the partner that I was with, we had increasingly become monogamous, not by definition, but only through practice. So basically, what had happened is I met her in a very kind of polyamorous community, and just started seeing her more and more and more. And there was something different about this woman in that I felt like she trusted me. And so I didn't have to prove myself to her. She was willing to actually just follow me, even though I was in such a terribly deluded state.
Dude, this is wild. This is crazy. So you guys met in a polyamorous community.
Yeah.
So she's coming in, comfortable hooking up with multiple dudes. You're coming in comfortable hooking up with multiple women, and then you guys.
She hadn't been there before. I introduced her to it.
Okay. I understand. But she was open to it.
Yeah.
But then you ultimately end up in a monogamous relationship, I'm assuming, right? There's a period
but
where
again, just by practice, like in theory, it was open, but I'd lost interest in other women because I just felt like there's so much depth here in this one woman. I don't need anybody else.
And then you go from that to, hey, I want to practice celibacy because I believe in God now. Like what a journey. That's crazy. I should have we should have got your wife on this interview as well, because I'd love to hear her side of it. But that is fascinating.
Yeah, it's been an amazing journey. It's been incredible. So what happened, I can give you just the fill in the final little dots, is that we came back to Copenhagen after this experience, and I said to her, like, I have to go away and figure out what I want with the rest of my life and if we're going to be together. So I broke up with her. I moved to the other side of the country, lived at a Bible school for 9 months.
Sorry, I thought this was like, I'm going to go camp for a week and get some clarity. You ended everything to go figure things out.
Yeah. I stopped my work, went into a Bible school, stayed there for 9 months. And at the end of my stay there, that was when both of us simultaneously, just almost by coincidence, I don't know, we both found the Orthodox Church. And when we both found that and we had the exact same idea of where we wanted to go, then it became very clear, like, this is the woman for me. And so I proposed to her, married her 1 month later, invited all of her friends without even telling her. So we had like 160, 170 people that came to our wedding. And then she fell pregnant on our wedding night. And so today we have 2 children. The first is 5 years old and the second's 2. And we're praying to God for more.
Come on. This story's wild, man. I've never heard anything like this. This is so cool.
God is great. It's all God.
It is.
None of it is because of me. I'm just the one who squandered everything.
Well, it's literally that story. Like, how else could you explain this other than God? God just, in his sovereignty, aligning things for you, saving you from certain things, and bringing you guys together to produce a beautiful family and an incredible brand manifesto, which I want to get into in a minute. Why Eastern Orthodoxy? How did that happen, and why did you convert to that specifically?
Yeah, so I had this very powerful experience, but I didn't know how to understand it really. I needed a framework. I needed some kind of structure that I could put there, and I wanted to meet other people who saw God, had experienced God in the same way as me. And so we came back to Copenhagen, and we started visiting churches. Some of them we visited together, some of them we visited apart from each other, and just didn't feel like we were really connecting anywhere. So we were even like, okay, do we start our own church? Like, maybe we should do that. We held even some meetings and stuff like that, but we just didn't feel we were connecting. I had been working with men for some 3 or 4 years before this, running men's retreats and workshops and kind of like events, training for men. And starting to do this from kind of like some kind of tantra field, but obviously that also changed very radically, similar to this Rush V guy, I guess, although he really made a radical change as well. But I also, so that had been a central thing for me. So I was looking for good men that I could find in a church as well. And was really struggling for for some time. I think it was about 2 years or so, until I walked into an Orthodox church. And I can give you a whole lot of reasons for it, but just like from the very first moment we stepped in, it was just a little evening service. There was like 8, 9 people there. I just knew it was something very, very different, and this was home.
Wow.
This was home. Yeah.
So how long ago was that? I'm trying to chart the timeline. Is that like 5, 6 years ago?
I was baptized 6.5 years ago or so.
Okay.
And it took me about 9 months to a year to get baptized from when I first stepped in. So 7 years ago, maybe. Yeah.
So, I mean, I'd love to hear some of the reasons. What was it about your experience with the Orthodox Church that drew you in?
So I'm quite a mental, cognitive guy. And so there was something about seeing ancient Christianity, the way it's been practiced in the very, very early church, not with drums and guitars and all kinds of other things, but like the worship. Orthodoxy just means right worship. And so the primary definition of the Orthodox Church is based on that they've preserved the way that God was worshipped in the very, very early, by the very early Christians. Yeah. So it's a very incredibly intense, beautiful type of worship that's very sensory, with incense and with candles and with prostrations. We see Muslims doing these prostrations where you bow down to the ground. Actually, they have it from Christians. Christians used to do prostrations as well, and Orthodox still do that as well. It's a very manly, masculine type of religion in some ways. It's very feminine in this kind of sensory incense and all this kind of stuff. There's a feminine side to it, but there's also a very strong masculine side to it, in that there's expectations to you. You stand up for these services that are 3-4 hours long. They're like these very long, intense meditations where you go through the full range of emotions during one of these services. You get tired, you're exhausted, you get frustrated, you get bored, whatever it is, right? and then you experience ecstasy and joy sometimes if when you receive God's grace. But there's fasts, like we fast for 40 days before Easter, before 40 days before Christmas, we fast. And it's expected. It's an obligatory thing for all Orthodox Christians. It can be adjusted in agreement with your spiritual father, how it should be done, and to what extent you can manage it. But it's expected for Orthodox Christians. So there's these tools that are there not to kind of force you into a specific way of being, but more that have just worked for 2,000 years in healing people from their challenges through being able to help them to feel deeper into themselves and notice the brokenness that's down inside there. That's very much been my experience as well. So I think that's I could sense that when I came in there. I could sense that from the men that I met when I came in there as well. Not perfect men in any way whatsoever, but just men who were engaged in a serious struggle together in order to become better human beings. Men and women, of course, as well. But I was primarily oriented towards the men, I also met men as priests that I feel that I could look up to as well, especially here in Denmark. In Christianity, it's not doing well because it's been under state control, like it's complete state control, the church for very, very long time, and so there's a lot of Christians here in name, but most of them don't even believe in God. So it was very different coming into Orthodoxy. We worship as if God did become man, actually did die, actually did institute a church, which we're a member of and we're a family with together right now. And all of the saints through all the time, like they're there with us. We see them in the icons. And in the book of Hebrews, it talks of this great cloud of witnesses. And when we're in church, we're standing there with them, worshiping God. And the whole of the Orthodox worship is modeled very much on the images that we have of worship in heaven, the way that heaven works. So when you step into the Orthodox Church, into a service, you're experiencing a little earthly version of that. You're stepping into eternity for that little time, and it's painful for us because we're broken human beings, but we're actually coming into the presence of God.
Yeah, that's really cool. Yeah, I haven't had tons of conversations with people about Eastern Orthodoxy, which is one of the reasons I wanted you on the podcast. But the conversations I have had do often center on some of these things you're talking about. There's great structure in a world where men have not been raised with structure. There's incredible masculinity in a world where men are hearing it's not okay to be masculine, and where a lot of the churches become very feminine, especially in the Western world. And then there's just like a really great adherence, like you said, to orthodoxy, which orthodoxy means like, the way it was originally done. And there's something to be said about doing a practice that you just know is tried, tested, and true. It stood the test of time for multiple millennia. So it makes perfect sense. And I think it's absolutely beautiful, even just the way you laid it out. How did this all affect Manifesto? And maybe it wasn't even called Manifesto before, but you mentioned it was a little bit more tantra, kind of new age, and a radical conversion that I have to imagine just totally 180 the way that you were serving men.
It's been quite a difficult way. So Manifesto was started before I converted to Christianity. And I basically came back from that experience down in South Africa and stepped straight into, like 2 days later, into a big men's gathering with like 80 guys or something like that. And had to they had come for one specific reason. And I had a radically different approach. So in the opening circle, I divided guys into groups of 8 or something like that. And then I said, like, okay, every man share with each other, like, what is your best positive understanding of the concept of God? Like, what is God? If you had to say, like, what is God for you, then what is it? What's the highest thing in life? Yeah. And so it gave an interesting experience, but I still had no real foundation. So it's taken me quite some time to really figure things out. Really importantly, me and my wife, after we married, we moved out into the countryside, bought like a 360-year-old homestead in the countryside in Denmark.
Wow.
And I've really been looking for, like, how can I ground this work in a far more practical, down-to-earth sense? Because we were really doing some kind of spiritual rites of passage work back then. And so what I've really landed on is accountability groups, where guys sign up with a subscription and they then meet with a group once a week for 1 hour. And that group meeting is used for men to be able to put forward and understand their goals and plans for what they want to achieve right now. And for some men, that can be, getting over porn addiction, but more often it's going to be, and it's used very much for that as well. But it's also very much for, I want to launch a new business, or I want to start calling my mom every day or every second day or something like that. Or I want to improve my relationship with my wife, or, whatever it is. I need to get a job. I need to, lose 5 kilograms or something like that. And then these guys, they actually have daily buddy calls with each other. And so there's a culture and a system whereby men are developing supportive friendship with each other, really. I think that's the main thing. I'm not in the groups. The groups are led by volunteers. And these guys really form like a little band of brothers that are helping each other to move through and towards the things that they, through the problems and struggles and towards whatever it is that they want to achieve. So they define that for themselves.
That's beautiful. Yeah, I love that. Why do you think it is that men need accountability to that degree today?
I think we're so fragmented and separated from each other. I think a lot of men. So I also have a lot of in-person events here in Denmark. And what I notice every single time there's just men there, there'll always be a couple of guys there who will at some point share that they actually feel quite uncomfortable being in a company just with other men. And I think a lot of men have grown up with thinking that, other guys, we have to compete with them. And, we can kind of share our weaknesses and our vulnerabilities with women because they'll give us sympathy and care and stuff like that. And so I think men need to relearn how to create strong, supportive friendships where we're actually there for each other. We want to build each other up. We want to support each other. I think these are just basic skills that, a lot of guys feel lonely and disconnected and that like there's nobody there for them. There's no one they can turn to. And it's because they haven't actually got those skills, which I think normally come between a father and his son. I think that's the primary place. Really what should happen is that a son should be able to tell his dad his biggest fears, his biggest dreams, his aspirations, his concerns, his, the things that he's anxious about. And the father should be able to listen to those and not fix them for his son, but just be able to be there as a person to reflect them and to show confidence and to be a man who's gone the path before. And then when the child asks for support and help and guidance, then he can guide him there. But more often the father will just be like listening to, well, what are you going to do about this, son? And then the son's going to say, well, I'm going to do this, I'm going to do this, I'm going to do this. And then the father can say, well, that sounds great. And I especially like that idea that you had over there. And then the son goes off and does it. And then he comes back and he says, Dad, I did it. And look what happened. And then he can be like, well done, my son. That's fantastic. Giving that affirmation as well. So that's where I think that's what we can do for each other as brothers. And when you come into a community of men who are doing that for each other, we're almost, you could call it reparenting or refathering each other in some way of building up, repairing those broken wounds. It's also what happens inside a church optimally as well, of course. But there's different layers of it. The way I look at it is like the church works on like our basic manhood. It's the ontological being a man and can fix that. Whereas with men and communities outside of the church, especially something like Manifesto, which is a commercial thing, then we're really working more on like manliness. Manliness is just the qualities amongst men, the virtues, the qualities that make men attractive, that people have appreciated in men throughout all time. And that includes, discipline and the ability to commit and stability and strength, and then skills, being able to actually do something valuable for other people, create value. Those are the kinds of things we can help each other as men with.
That's amazing. Yeah, and the reality is, if you look at any guy, even the guy online who kind of pitches it like, I built my own empire all by myself, it's not true. Like any guy who's really done something great with his life had other men that he was held accountable to. I was just listening to an interview with Phil Heath. I don't know if you know who he is. Very like a world famous bodybuilder. And, he's like he's like an 8-time Mr. Olympia or something like that. And he talked about how much time he actually got mentored by the person who was kind of like the premium bodybuilder before that, Jay. I'm forgetting his last name now. But it was just so interesting here, like on the front, these guys were both just self-made. They came out of nowhere, quote unquote. we're kind of competitors with each other, but behind closed doors, they're traveling together, they're learning from each other. Like there's literally that built-in accountability and kind of spurring each other on going on. And I just feel like it doesn't matter where you look. This is like what you built here. The accountability groups is so critical. And in my personal opinion, and I love your thoughts on this, but I just think the way our world is designed today, especially with technology, and just a lot of the messaging around, masculinity and manhood and what a man should be and shouldn't be. No one's doing this for us. Like if we're not intentionally getting into places where we're being held accountable as men, it's just not going to happen. And we're going to, perform and fulfill a fraction of what we could have if we would have just got plugged into a community properly. Hey guys, let's pause the content just for a minute. I got something super exciting to show you. Follow me. I'm going to give you scenario A and scenario B, and I want you to tell me, which person do you think has a better chance of quitting porn? Scenario A, it's Joe. And Joe is quitting porn on his own. Scenario 2, we got Jim. And Jim is in a community. Now, if you know your Bible, you'll know that Proverbs says, he who isolates himself seeks his own desires. And what that means is, when we're not in community and we're trying to pursue freedom or healing or integrity, our odds are stacked against us. I know this because I tried to quit porn on my own for 15 years. And it wasn't until I got into a community that I actually started to get breakthrough. Now, the reason I'm sharing this is because I just built a community for men like you who are serious about the call of God in their lives, their relationships, and becoming everything that God made them to be. If you're sick and tired of struggling with pornography, check out this community. The link is in the description. And with this, you don't just get a community, you get my proven formula, the deep clean method for quitting pornography, and you get coaching directly from me to ensure that all the odds are stacked in your favor to walk in the freedom that Christ has afforded you. If you want to find out more, click the link below.
First of all, a lot of the time, the things we think that we want to do, we actually don't want to do them. We're living in a fantasy about like some kind of future dream of like, oh, one day the world's going to be completely different. And when I get there, then I'm going to be happy. But it's actually just a fantasy. And when I start actually taking concrete steps towards it, actually, that's not actually what I want, I figure out. And so a lot of men, when they come into core, that's what they realize. They realize like, oh, that's actually just a fantasy. Actually, what I want is something else. It's more in this direction. And then you start moving in that direction. It's like, oh, it's just a little bit more this way. And so you start actually figuring out what it is that you actually want. And that means you actually tap into a deeper sense of motivation, a deeper sense of purpose in your life as well, because you're with other men who are on the same path as you of moving towards. It's not about cutting off your desire. It's about correctly directing your desire, because it's the shame and the pain that makes us allow our desire to go down towards destructive addictions and whatever it is that we're using to stop ourselves from doing what we're supposed to be doing, what we're created for in this life. And when we stop doing that and we're with other people we can share our pain and our disconnection with and feel together with brotherhood, then we can help each other to start just opening up to the possibility that there's something and finding that true direction.
Yeah, that's beautiful, man. I want to switch gears slightly because a huge part of my story of quitting pornography is I had this motivation that I didn't want to bring pornography into my marriage. I wanted to enter marriage and become a husband as a clean man. And God really answered that prayer of mine. I quit porn in February 2016. I met the woman who's now my wife November 2016, about 9 months later. And, we have a son together. We have another baby on the way at the time that we're recording this, and God's been very good to us.
Congratulations. Beautiful.
Thank you, man. I appreciate it. And like you, I want to have more. Having kids is the best. So what I want to ask you, though, is because of my story, right, and because of my journey, I know we have men in our audience, people that are watching this on YouTube or listening to the podcast that are not yet married and are maybe hearing about, okay, I understand the Christian ethic. I understand the standards of scripture that say, sex is to be reserved for a marriage, a covenant relationship. And, it's meant to embody the role that Christ fulfills with his church and the Trinity, like all those different layers of biblical meaning. And people maybe get it logically, but in practice, especially in today's hypersexualized world, and especially in the Western world, I mean, this is a very difficult thing actually for a guy to live by, especially because he doesn't have mentors and people who are actually walking this by example. And I can only think of a handful of people that I could ask this question to. And I want to ask it to you. What's the biggest difference between marriage before sex. Sorry, sex before marriage, before you married the woman who's now your wife. What's the big difference between that and sexual intimacy with her in a marriage context and a covenant?
Well, the difference, I guess, is that it's connected into the natural, meaningful purpose and reason for it being there when you're inside a marriage relationship. So, like we've with all kinds of things. So in Orthodoxy, we also don't agree to using prevention, or kind of artificial ways of preventing pregnancy as well. So it's like when you're having sex with a person, with your wife, then it's fully with this full connection, full sense of connection, and so everything's there. It's not like there are branches of Christianity which look upon sex very negatively as like, oh, it's only about procreation. That's not the Orthodox perspective. Basically, this was Saint Augustine, who was a sex addict himself before he became a Christian, who then wrote very aggressively against sexuality and had a pretty dark view of it. Sure. That's not the Eastern Orthodox perspective at all. We have a little bit more reservations when it comes to Augustine, and St. John Chrysostom, for example, has a far more positive understanding of Christianity, writes about it, about sexuality, writes about it in very positive terms. So it's the whole package. It's it's that joy and that ecstasy and that incredible intensity that comes from connecting with another human being, but it's also with the full knowledge that this is the way that life is created, and it could lead to life being created. And so you're actually really getting to know that person, because you think you're getting to know a woman when you're having sex with her outside of marriage, but you're not. You're both putting on a mask. You're playing a game with each other somehow, and especially if you don't have any intention of having a child with this person, it's really just two people rubbing their genitals on each other to get a little kick out of it. So using each other as a some kind of object to stimulate your genitals with no greater purpose or meaning whatsoever. That's what it is. It gives a feeling of intensity because that's the way God created it. But it's an abuse of that gift instead of the correct use of it. The correct use of it is it's the foundational root of the building block of human society. It's the family. And so what we need is men and women who love and appreciate and are committed to each other, take responsibility for each other in the foundation of marriage. And the contract of that marriage is sexual fidelity. It's purity. May the wedding bed be undefiled. It's absolutely necessary.
Yeah.
There are marriages that can survive infidelity, but it can never be. It's very hard for it to completely forgiven. God can give His grace, but it takes a divine act far outside of our reach as human beings to really trust it again after that kind of thing happens.
Yeah. Well, and you also just it takes years. I mean, we see this with our clients for sure, who have had affairs, or even just pornography alone is a different form of infidelity and can create a lot of betrayal. And you end up spending so much energy trying to reconcile your marriage that you could have spent building a healthier and stronger marriage as well. Maybe I'm going to ask another question, but maybe from a slightly different angle. You and your now wife, you guys were together. You were sexually active. You have a conversion. You both decide to be celibate. There's a breakup there. How long is that period from when you decide to be celibate? Also, I guess when you gave your life to God. How long is that period from when that happened to when you got married, roughly?
1.5 to 2 years, something like that.
Okay, so 1.5 to 2 years, and then you get married, and obviously now you guys are having kids together and all of that. So I think my question is, how do you think the sexual intimacy in your marriage would be different had you not had that 18 to 24 month period of celibacy?
It's hard to know. I don't know if I would have. I think I needed the celibacy to figure out, to really commit. So I'm not sure if our sex life would have been so different. That's hard to say. I would more say that I would have had doubts in my mind if I'd done the right thing. If I just kind of stayed in the relationship. So it was really necessary for me. I think the fact that we were having sex with each other, I couldn't feel myself. I didn't know what I really wanted because I was intertwined with this woman. And so to figure out to think clearly, I needed to create a sense of separation. And having made that separation, I think I could be certain, and then I can carry that certainty with me. And so when I meet my wife today, I can say that sex is a less important part of our marriage today. It's more enjoyable in many ways, and it's definitely far more meaningful.
But that's a really good point, though. Like that, because I think when you are having sex outside of marriage, the relationship and your priorities in the relationship can be very skewed, right? They get very out of order. They're not in that divine order that God had intended. So that I wasn't expecting you to say that, but now that you're saying it, it actually makes a lot of sense. Because I remember even my first relationship where I was sexually active, about a year and a half into it, like when we go to hang out, all I'm just thinking about is what I'm going to get sexually. I'm not really thinking about connecting with her. I'm definitely not thinking really about a long-term commitment, even though maybe we're saying it, my heart's not there. So that actually makes a lot of sense, that the celibacy allowed you to actually, like, emotionally and psychologically really make sure that you were actually, your yes was going to be yes, your no was going to be no, and that you were going to be properly committed, and then everything else kind of fell into place after.
Yeah, taking my own life seriously, to really figure things out properly, and to act with integrity, because I realized I'd been acting out of integrity for such a long time. But what are you thinking of as like the difference for a man, like sex inside a marriage, if you have or haven't had celibacy? Do you have a perspective on that?
Well, I can share from my own experience. My wife and I didn't have that experience that you guys did. I mean, we just weren't sexually active until we got married. But like I said, in a previous relationship, I was sexually active, and those sexual experiences they were a fraction of the fulfillment that I get from the sexual experiences I have with my wife in a marriage. And I think the other thing is there's a security, there's a longevity, because my wife and I have made a covenant with each other. Like we didn't get married because it's the next step in a relationship. We got married because we want to spend the rest of our lives together. And that longevity really takes a lot of the pressure out of sex. It makes it a lot more enjoyable. There isn't that pressure to perform the same way. And I know for me, I'm a lot more present. Whereas in my earlier sexual experiences, I wasn't, and part of that might have been the influence of pornography as well. I was almost two different people, really. But that for me was the big difference. So men need accountability. That's why you've built these core groups. What else do men need to thrive and be healthy in the 21st century today?
Well, that's my big new project I'm working on right now. I've called it the path of manliness. And what I've identified really as being very helpful for me is something that when I grew up in, even in the church community that I was living in, was kind of demonized and pushed aside. And certainly was throughout the entire society, was seen as something that was, we were done with. And that's what I call tradition. Tradition is kind of like, the word means to pass down, to give forward, to give onwards, right? And so what I think a lot of people are realizing is we're living in a society based on a foundational assumption of progression. Everything is always getting better by itself all the time. And, it's all just going to be like fantastic. Basically, the idea of evolution is, of course, built on the idea of progression as well, is that we're naturally just evolving to higher and higher life forms. And, that's automatically going to lead us now to transhumanism, because we evolved into being humans. So we're also going to evolve into the next thing, being computers and just existing up in
super species,
the sky, whatever, right? And so I think a lot of people are, and especially young men, 16, 17, 18-year-olds who I know are looking at this and they think like, this is going seriously wrong. Like, this is going really weird. Like now all of a sudden, like, you could just decide if you want to be a man or a woman, but the people who are doing that are like committing suicide in like, massive levels. And we're being encouraged that this is a great thing. And, there's just something that's off the rails a little bit. And so, I think from a lot of people, the answer they start getting interested in, well, what is the roots of our society? Where is it that things came from? What is the strong foundation, the rock that things were built on that worked for such a long time? And can we get back to some of that, please? I think a lot of people are saying. And so that's what I'm trying to write about. It's called The Path of Manliness. I have a Substack where I'm writing about it. And the core traditional roles that I'm looking at for men is being a good son, being a good brother, being a good husband, and then becoming a father. And those are traditional roles that men have had, and there's so much wisdom there. There's so much wisdom, and instead we think, oh no, we have to reinvent everything again. It's all useless. We can't use it at all. But what I actually find is that no, it's actually not true. It's actually not true. There's the old ideas are still working.
Yeah. Well, and I think our hyper ultra progressive world, especially you think about maybe the last 5-10 years, what's transpired and the mess that it's created, I think it's making it pretty clear that we could use a little more tradition in our lives. So that's pretty cool. You mentioned being a son, being a husband, being a father. What traditions are there? Any traditions that exist in all of those realms that you're like, I can't believe we're not doing this. I can't believe we threw this out. That we totally threw the baby out with the bathwater. Any traditions in particular that you're really going to drive home in the new project?
Well, the core tradition of the sun, which is the foundation of all the other roles, it's like there's a macro cycle in life, but there's micro cycles as well. But
you got to become a good son first.
You have to become a good son before you can become a father. And so, what does the son do? Well, the son should obey his father. And instead, we've built a culture of rebellion, of glorification of rebellion, and of the son going his own way. And so there's this cycle in history of rebellion whereby the son, and this is very, very old. This goes back to ancient Greek mythology where, if you look at the very oldest stories of how the world came into being, then basically you have fathers teaming up with their moms to kill their dads or cut off his to castrate him with their moms. And it goes through all Greek mythology and many other situations as well. And and then basically the father, the son then replaces the father, but becomes even worse tyrant than he was. And that's the pattern that we've seen through all of contemporary history as well, especially accelerating as we see this glorification of rebellion increasing. Like we even, So that's I think the core element that we need to learn is that there's wisdom that we don't understand in tradition and in past generations. And we, in the Bible, it's taken very seriously. Like you need to honor your father. It doesn't say honor your father as long as he's nice and good to you. It doesn't say honor your father as long as he's like, he does the right stuff and he treats you well. It just says honor your father. And so, that's, we have this idea, this idea like, my father's not the right father for me. He's not good enough. It's like, no, God gives us a father because so we will get wounded by our father. We will get hurt. Our father will have imperfections. He'll do things wrong. And our job, we're a part of a lineage. And so our job is to continue the lineage by healing the things, and our father's carrying a lot more than what we know. We don't know what his dad did to him, right? So he's shielding the best he can from all of that stuff beforehand and protecting us. He gave us life, like St. John Chrysostom, he says, whatever you can ever do for your father, you can never repay him because he gave you life. He's the reason you exist. And so you can't repay your father, but the least you can do is not to demonize him and to blame him for all of your problems, but instead to appreciate what he has done and then take up the burden for the next generation.
Yeah.
And you do that by, as in a position of obedience and appreciation as a son, not as one who's like, I'm going to be a far better dad than my dad. I'm going to make sure I never do anything like he did. That's because then you just act up, swing to the other pole, right? That's why you have like the tough, dominant father. His son becomes the Mr. Nice guy who's pleasing everybody, but then actually, isn't it all authentic and real? And then his son will rebel against that and become a bad boy, and the cycle just continues, right?
Yeah, it's the truth, man. It's the truth. Well, you're onto something really powerful there. So I'm excited to hear more about it. Paul, thanks for your time. For people who do want to find out more just about what you're up to and Manifesto in general, what's the best way for them to do that?
Yeah, it's manifesto with a ph.com, manifesto.com. And there's a network there called Core Teams. When people sign up, the first thing they do is have a one-on-one half-hour conversation with me to get onboarded with those core teams. It's a network of accountability groups that's really useful. And if people are interested and excited about what I'm doing with, this idea of tradition and these traditional roles that men are in and how to live them better, I'm learning myself. I'm not the master whatsoever. I'm very much a son in this, trying to learn. Then it's The Path of Manliness on Substack.
Thanks for your time, man. We'll put all the links in the show notes, and this was phenomenal.
Thank you so much, Satya. It was a real pleasure and great questioning. I really appreciate it and enjoyed the conversation.